To put it bluntly, Everhood is an attempt at seeing if indie games can derive heavy inspiration from their predecessors while simultaneously bringing something new to the table. Haven't heard of it before? You are not to be blamed. This game came out on the 4th of March 2021, and even though it does have a pretty passionate core of fans, it doesn't appear to be catering outside of a very specific audience at first. It's got a very similar art style to Undertale, to the point where I needed to go check online if Toby Fox was associated in any way, shape or form to the project, which he is not. It's got similar ideas in terms of game design too. You are a silent protagonist going through what appears to be a fictional world with weird characters on a mission with a singular purpose, while going through a gameplay loop that requires you to interact with said characters to progress this mission, while trying to subvert your expectations along the way. Even the idea of having this really unique soundtrack for your game appears to be a callback to Undertale. So it's no surprise that most people brushed this off of their Steam recommended page as another clone of a popular game that attempts to capitalize on its success. Undertale was and still is a planetary success with a following that boggles the mind of anyone that takes the time to dive deeper into it. Therefore, when you have a game that's relatively similar with a fraction of the popularity, your ripoff alarms go off. However, if that was the case, there wouldn't be much of a video, so let's see what makes Everhood a true hidden gem that you should definitely buy. I promise, not an ad. Do you like Toby Fox? His early Homestuck content was a little too eccentric for my tastes. But when Undertale came out in 2015, I think he really came into his own, commercially and artistically. The whole game has a wacky, zany narrative and a new take on antiquated gameplay mechanics that really gave the game's quality a big boost. It's been compared to Earthbound before, but I think Toby Fox had a far greater impact on internet culture. Three years later, Toby Fox released this, Deltarune, his most accomplished work. I think it's his undisputed masterpiece, a work so refined most people probably take its designs for granted. But they shouldn't, because it's not just a sequel to one of the best games that has ever been written and produced, it's also a riff off of its creator's own influence and an example of meta-reference on the internet. Hey Everhood! Any game that has to be compared to Undertale, Deltarune, or anything Toby Fox makes is going to eventually be crushed under the weight of its predecessor, and Everhood doesn't really help itself with that. As I've said before, it derives some heavy, very liberal inspiration from Undertale. The beginning is almost the same. You start in an alcove where something finds you. You go through a tutorial with a benevolent figure, you are introduced to the mechanics of the game. Very nice. The characters have similar aesthetics, which, how exactly? Some of the characters in Undertale were so out there that it truly was the work of an insane person. I'm not sure how creators Chris Nordgren and Jordi Roca managed to replicate their style.
That's fucking Garter from fucking Undertale, isn't it?
Speaking of, they described their own game as an unconventional adventure RPG in an inexpressible world filled with amusing musical battles and strange delightful encounters. To put it simply, you are in for a ride. Honestly, this description is almost perfect. It's just surface level enough that it pretty much describes the whole game in one go to intrigue you, but doesn't actually give you anything concrete to expect. We will come back to it later though, because there are a few things about it that I think you should know before buying this game, even though I think you should. Point is, Everhood has similar aesthetics to Undertale and Deltarune, which, fair enough, is absolutely true, so what exactly sets it apart? What makes it not a ripoff? Well, let's begin with the very first point. Gameplay. Everhood's gameplay is really difficult to describe when standing alone, but once compared with other titles in gaming history, it becomes quite a bit easier to grasp what exactly this gem offers you, the player, in terms of gameplay. Everhood is Guitar Hero meets Earthbound meets Audio Surf. The game is split between three modes, the first one being more akin to an adventure game where you need to find your way out of mazes, find items, find the bad guy, defeat him, all of that stuff. The second one is combat, This game has a very peculiar way of dealing with combat where you will sometimes have battles that happen within an interface and sometimes have battles that happen outside of the interface. The ones with the interface are the most common and the ones that are the most similar to Guitar Hero. In this game, music is considered to be a lethal force, so it can harm you in multiple ways. It's the incarnation of the soft magic system that exists in this world. The third one is exposition. It's the one that's the most contentious to categorize. In this mode, you are being exposed to a narrative that is more often than not confusing at first, and then makes a whole lot of sense once you progress through the game enough to understand the things that are being told to you, or if you play through the games enough time that you can piece the whole narrative together. Speaking of which, the narrative in this game is really freaking weird, but in a really good and refreshing way. Without spoiling anything, it's essentially about coming to irrefutable truths about the world you live in, while simultaneously trying to get as close as possible to a simple, pure understanding of these things.
What the fuck is this game, dude?
This vision for the game informs the direction heavily, and it is a joy to experience. There is a great argument to be made for accessible games with a lot of depth, if the player wishes to engage with it, to be the ones that will more often than not garner a lot of attention, or at least this appears to be the trend for the past 10 to 15 years or so. If you take a game like Skyrim for instance, one of the things that makes the game really great is the depth to which the narrative can immerse itself into. You can find quests that will ask you to plant random evidence on somebody, or quests that will ask you to dig up some ancient relic of the past that was referenced like once in a previous game before being made into a fully fledged quest in this one. Everhood kind of follows the same path. You can progress through the main story and have a great time without ever really thinking about what you're doing, do side missions that seemingly appear to have no consequences whatsoever in the world, try to find ways to circumvent what the game is asking you to do. Your involvement with the game dictates the depth of your experience. It's not gonna shove it down your throat like some narrative games. I'm talking to you, Last of Us 2. Don't think you're safe around here. Alright, let's move on to the second point. It's genre. So this might not be exactly clear, but Undertale is primarily a role-playing adventure game. Most of the content revolves around the story created and how you as the playable character can influence it in a positive, neutral, or negative manner. There is a good argument to be made that Everhood is also a role-playing adventure game, but this is a little disingenuous because it doesn't take into account half of the game. It makes much more sense to characterize Everhood as a rhythm game, something that cannot be said for Undertale, since almost all of the role-playing elements Undertale would have to offer are replaced with rhythm game elements in Everhood. You can see this with the first encounter in both games. Undertale wishes to introduce you to the RPG combat mechanics it is built upon, whereas Everhood wants you to understand the mechanics of its rhythm game elements. This is also exemplified by the fact that a good chunk of the achievements for Everhood are centered around not getting hit at all during these rhythm encounters, which means that the developers expect people to behave in this game the same way they would in any other rhythm game, trying to get 100% completion and full combos.
It's gonna happen, it's happening. Yep. No hit frog. Did we get it? I think we got it. Yeah! We got it. No hit frog. Yeah, let's go! You saw that? That was sick.
This is also exemplified by the fact that the story relies on the rhythm portion of the game to function. Same goes for the role-playing aspect. If you have played the game, you know exactly what's up. It has to do with the story, but if you don't, then you'll know once you play it. It's kinda hard to elaborate without spoiling the story, which is not the goal of this video, but yeah, everything relies to some degree on you playing the funny rhythm game to function, which is not something present in Undertale. You can decide to not engage at all with its combat mechanics and still progress forward. So instead of calling it a role-playing adventure game, it's much more fair to call it an unconventional rhythm game. Oh, hey, here comes the comments saying that the description literally says that it is an adventure RPG. We did say we'd get back to it, right? The developers think their game is an adventure RPG. Again, fair enough, or so we thought. Listen, again, I don't want to spoil anything, but the Steam homepage for the game really does not reflect what the game is about and or what it will make you experience. In that way, Everhood also has another tremendously heavy influence, Doki Doki Literature Club by Dan Salvato, the pro Smash Link and creator of 20XX Tournament Edition. It's actually pretty crazy that nobody has made the link since now, but it truly is uncanny. Everhood does not prepare you at all for what you are about to experience, and that is a good thing. It's the reason why Doki Doki worked so well, because you got into the game expecting one thing and got another completely. Everhood delivers the same philosophy in game design. You expect this to be a walk in the park, a cute little adventure RPG a la Undertale, and you get hit with the incinerator level, need I say more? Sure, you play a role through the story and you discover the world you play in, so there are elements of role-playing and elements of adventure, but this is primarily a rhythm game, and if you are on the fence about buying it, then maybe this is what will push you to do it. Alright, final and third point, the goal of the story. Do you recall when I said that Everhood derives heavy inspiration from its predecessors while simultaneously bringing something new to the table? The new part of that phrase is more important than you might have thought. Listen, once again, this is a spoiler-free review, so you might still be wondering after all this time if the narrative is any different from any of the previously mentioned game. It is. Big time. Even the way that I conceptualize it, it's like the antithesis of Undertale. Everhood attempts to take the message of Undertale and flip it on its head. It asks the question, what if the presentation of Undertale was kept the same but the story elements were reversed? Not in order, mind you, but in meaning, something the game tries to make very clear if, like me, you tried to stray away from what the game demands you to do in the world, its characters, and its story. This might not be the most pleasant ride you've ever been on, let's frame it like that, but it is a ride you won't forget. It's like that one rinky-dink roller coaster that's been around for 150 years. You just know there's a good chance that you might just get launched into the air at 50 miles an hour, but if you're willing to accept that, then it will be one of the most thrilling things you've ever experienced. The video is already long enough as is, and there is simply no way for me to elaborate more on the point without spoiling you in some way, shape, or form, so instead, I will tell you that the story of Everhood is a solid top of A tier. It doesn't necessarily get into S, but it is truly almost there. The fact that some of the things you have to do in order to see some particular endings are absolute dog shit kind of bumps it down a notch, but it's nothing big enough to knock it down to B or C tier. With this in mind, a score. Everhood gets the legitimately great score of 8 out of 10. It's on the verge of greatness, and while nothing truly brings it down, it simply fails to bring anything to elevate it, which in itself is not a bad thing, but simply means that there could have been elements added in order to make it stand out more. Nonetheless, this game is not only a great homage to some of indie gaming's most renowned works, it is as subversive as it is intriguing and will keep you entertained for a hot minute if you are willing to interact with it the same you would with a rhythm game, endlessly trying to achieve a no-hit run for those sweet, sweet Steam achievements. Fuck you, Incinerator.